So the title of my talk today is Can Cryptocurrency Separate Money from the State? And as I start the talk, I want to start out with a little quote that I came up with, which is, if you use the money of your master, you are complicit to your own servitude. And so when we have dollars, every time you hold a dollar, every time you transact in a dollar, you reinforce the power in Washington. You support an unchecked bureaucracy with a federal registrar that's now over 100,000 pages in length. You support 750 foreign military bases, and you pay the salaries of the monitors at the NSA, and you enable the spies and the benders of truth at the CIA. So why is separating money from the state so important? It's the only path to realizing a moral society. And with that, we'll start to explore if crypto is able to do that, but I actually want to start with silver and gold, because silver and gold is a very old technology. And if we go back in time, the US actually enjoyed an economic boom during the 1800s, where we lived off the bimetallic standard. And if we want to not repeat history where we end up in a fiat currency, we must study the past and understand why and how we moved off of a sound money bimetallic standard. And so my conclusion of it is that there are difficulties with gold and silver, specifically related to storage, transport, and divisibility, arguably. And it's with those properties, those difficulties around using it as a transactional medium, that allowed for the introduction of paper money, initially as backed gold receipts, but with a receipt, you are creating a debt. With the debt, you're opening yourself up to fractional reserve banking, eventually central banking, and eventually strictly fiat-based money. So when we think about cryptocurrencies, we have to think about it in the context of why gold has failed as money. And with that, let's talk about what Bitcoin did. Bitcoin was this great innovation that introduced the concept of proof of work, which was a mechanism where we could create money that had the properties that were similar to that of gold. But when we're looking at Bitcoin and its ability to separate money from the state, we need to look at its properties and understand how those properties relate to that of gold and what caused gold to fail. So if we think about Bitcoin, Bitcoin has the issues of a limited throughput. It can only do 5 transactions per second. So if we were to attempt to use Bitcoin transactionally, it would fail. It also has 0 privacy. So unlike cash, where we can transact it anonymously, only known to the 2 parties in the transaction, Bitcoin is immutably recorded on this public ledger for anybody to see. When I couple that with analytics firms like Chainalytics, basically every transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain to the Genesis block is likely traceable back to every person who has ever done them. And third, volatility prevents the use of Bitcoin as money. So when we hold Bitcoin, we hold it as a store of value, and we hold it as a store of value in a world where we have fiat dollars. So anytime I have Bitcoin or I have dollars and I'm looking to transact, regardless of the scalability of Bitcoin, regardless of the cost and potential difficulty around sending it, I'm still always going to prefer my dollars because the future expected value of my dollars is going down, whereas the future expected value of my Bitcoin is going up. So creating a system that strictly has this property does not make money. There you go. Wait, sorry, wrong way. Okay, so what do we need? What we need is to create a system that is not only scalable, it has privacy, and it also has an alternative to the dollar that's endogenous to the decentralized system itself. So how do we go about doing that? The first question is, how do you scale the system? Now, if we recall from 3 slides ago, the property that Bitcoin introduced that was so interesting is proof of work. It allows us to create this decentralized system that has economics where nobody controls the system itself. And with not being able to control the system, you can create a static protocol which allows for this system of trustlessness. It is how we get the moneyness of Bitcoin, or at least the store of value in its digital scarcity. The problem is no one has figured out how to truly scale a proof of work system. So what we have done is we have created a new architecture, a new consensus mechanism, and a new type of blockchain. It's this hierarchy of merge-mined blockchains, so it's fundamentally based off the best piece of Bitcoin proof of work, but it's done in such a way that it can shard and scale the system to handle global level transaction throughput. So we have Visa-like transaction speeds of less than 8 seconds. We can do more than 50,000 transactions per second, decentralized and at scale. And with a scalable system, you can also get low consistent fees. So we can offer fees that are less than a penny per transaction today, tomorrow, and in perpetuity. One issue with cryptocurrencies being adopted into real businesses at scale is businesses do not know their costs. If I tell you you can do a transaction today for a penny, but it might be $10 or $100 in the future, and you need to do 1 million transactions, you go from a cost of $10,000 to $100 million, you can't build any sort of business that way. And what we've actually seen in crypto is that when we do get product market fits, we do see Web 2 companies create some form of adoption. The insufficiency of the technology of the blockchains themselves strangles the growth because it cannot keep low fees at scale. And we've seen that multiple times through multiple different systems. So the other thing, well, we'll get there. The other thing that you need is cash-like privacy. So I would argue that even for a competitive business, cash-like privacy is not optional. It is actually a requirement to maintain competitiveness. If I'm in a business and I have a competitor across the street and they know who comes into my store, what time they come into my store, how much they pay, what discounts I'm running, and what I'm being charged by my suppliers for my inputs, I can't even run a competitive business. So the concept of cryptocurrencies in society being used as a monetary medium requires, not optionally, that they have to have some form of cash-like privacy. So in our system, at least in the sort of chi part of the system, we have privacy by default. It is auditable by choice. So if you want to reveal sort of your audit keys, you can audit the system. And unlike any other privacy system, be it Monero, et cetera, this system actually can go to global scales. The last thing I will talk about is our energy dollar. And when we look at decentralized systems, and we look at blockchains, currently 70% of value that is being transferred in cryptocurrencies is taking place in US denominated stable tokens. There's a couple things that are bad about that. One is that we're reinforcing the hegemony of the dollar and the government's monopoly on that dollar. The other thing that we're doing is we're actually re-centralizing the decentralized system. So even if we had a perfectly decentralized system, let's say Ethereum is perfectly decentralized, it currently has $170 billion of US denominated stablecoins operating on it, and it only has a $250 billion market cap. If there was some controversial fork that wanted to change the Ethereum protocol, who dictates the outcome of that system? Is it the validators? Or is it the banks that are holding $170 billion worth of deposits that are backing up those receipts on chain, which are ultimately controlled by regulation through the Treasury? Ethereum is already controlled by the Treasury. They just haven't exercised their option of control. So building large denominations of fiat-backed custodian stables on even the most perfectly decentralized system causes that system to have dependency on fiat and on the system that we're trying to get away from. So what have we done with the energy dollar? We have figured out how to use proof of work where we can tokenize, create a token that's produced through mining and based off the market design converges to its production cost. So effectively this token in equilibrium always reflects the price of mining a hash. And with that we can create an endogenous token that has an external physical reference, i.e. energy prices, that's completely independent of the fiat-backed system, but can have properties of stability. So we've created a thing that is now a competitor for the dollar that is energy-backed, whose purchasing power should remain relatively consistent with time. And if we look at energy price volatility versus Canadian dollar USD volatility, that is the graph over there. And you actually have 4 times less volatility in your electricity pricing than you do in the US dollar Canadian dollar pair. So creating a token with this level of volatility makes a better monetary pricing unit than the Canadian dollar. So what have we fundamentally done with Quai? We've taken the best of crypto, the decentralization, the objective proof of work nature of Bitcoin. We've coupled it with a programmable finance layer with EVM compatibility, so we can do everything that Ethereum does and more. And we've replaced the need for having US denominated stablecoins in creating the world's first energy dollar. So with that, I will say, I believe if we are honest with ourselves about crypto and we think about nation states and the US government as adversarial actors because they're the ones that mint, produce, and control dollars, and we design to that adversary, we can separate money from the state. If we are not honest with ourselves and we get into reductionist arguments about something being a store of value or being able to scale in an L2, and we don't truly internalize what is required to create a system that's sufficiently resilient to resist that type of power, you will never succeed in creating an independent monetary system.